Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Kris Gethin Podcast, live from the VIP area at Hack Your Health. I have some great friends, great guests here for you today. Now, we did speak to Alex about 5 years ago, was it?
Yeah.
Where we spoke about molecular hydrogen. Now, today we have Tyler on the show as well to go a little bit more in depth into some of the studies, the research, more recent clinical studies about hydrogen. But I know there's a lot of people out there that are new to this area, and there's a strong reason why I take hydrogen, and we can go into that a little bit later. And I've been taking hydrogen for about 7 years now. But could you just give us a breakdown on what molecular hydrogen is? What is it, and what is its mechanism of action?
I'm going to give this to Tyler since he's more of an expert than me.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Kris, again, it's a pleasure. I'm happy to educate your audience a bit on molecular hydrogen. It has been a passion of mine since 2009. I was studying biochemistry at the time. Then I went and did a master's in exercise and sports conditioning, and then my PhD in physiology, researching molecular hydrogen. And so we published, my co-authors published over 40 articles, but there's over 3,000 publications in total now on molecular hydrogen. And the research is really kind of growing explosively, no pun intended. But to your question, what are we talking about? Well, molecular hydrogen, which is this diatomic gas, is the explosive gas. It's not hydrogen ions. There's a lot of confusion about alkaline pH, for example, or doesn't water already have hydrogen in it? Because water is H2O, and we're talking about H2.
Yeah.
It's not, because this hydrogen is hydrogen gas, just H2 that are connected together, and it's dissolved in the water. And there's different ways to administer hydrogen. In a number of the clinical studies we actually do inhalation of hydrogen gas. So you have like a nasal cannula or a mask, and you'll inhale the hydrogen gas. But you can dissolve it into water. And that's the tablets you talked about. That's what they do. Also, the tablets react with the water to produce hydrogen gas. All those bubbles you see, that's the hydrogen gas, right? So that's what's happening. It just dissolves in the water, and then you can drink that, and it goes into the body. Now, that's probably a very critical point to consider about molecular hydrogen, is the fact that it can get into the body and into the cells. Because something that could have wonderful benefits for you is only going to help if it can get into the cells. So that's like the number one issue in a lot of the studies we do, in vitro studies in cell culture. We can cure cancer and do all these crazy things, but it would never work in vivo or in the body because it would be destroyed by the stomach acid. It would be metabolized by the bacteria. You could never absorb it. Even if you got it into the blood, you can never get it into the cells and so on, right? Hydrogen gas is the smallest molecule in the universe, and it's neutral. So it can get into the cell membrane, penetrate the cell membrane really easy, and into the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, and everywhere else really easy, where it can start providing its therapeutic benefits.
Right, okay, interesting. Now, there's lots of different ways that mechanism of action can happen, correct? And there's different forms of the molecular, the hydrogen gas. So you can actually have gas, you can have it in water, like in a Morozko ice bath or something like that. You can have them in bottles that you see everywhere. You have the tablets. What have you found? Well, let's talk about all these different ways that you can take in hydrogen, and which do you feel, from what you've seen in your studies, is the more efficacious way of taking it?
Okay, it sounds like you kind of have two questions: methods of administration, and then products to provide that method of administration. Right? So methods of administration include the drinking hydrogen water, inhalation of hydrogen gas, bathing in hydrogen water, topical application in different ways, intravenous injection of hydrogen gas, dropping hydrogen-rich saline into your eyes, or even eating a healthy diet of fibers, and those fibers will be metabolized by our intestinal bacteria to produce hydrogen gas.
If you have the right bacteria.
That's right. Not everybody has the right bacteria.
This is a big point. In understanding why hydrogen is so critical and showing all these health benefits, research has been showing that somewhere between 60 to 80% of middle-aged, metabolically impaired people, like overweight people, when they're given fiber and given a hydrogen breath test, they're producing methane instead of hydrogen. So poor lifestyle over a lifetime has basically killed off these bacteria that can produce hydrogen because they're not getting fuel.
Yeah, we actually just published, actually maybe it's not published yet, but we can talk about it though. But in this clinical study, we basically showed that people with diabetes and metabolic syndrome, that their breath hydrogen gas production was lower than the normal controls. So they were not producing as much hydrogen gas. But it's a correlation, not causation. However, this may indicate that hydrogen has a protective effect in helping to prevent things like the glucose intolerance, insulin insensitivity, and so on. So just with the bacteria, that does have benefits.
We see the same correlation in the elderly. Say typically as we age, methane rises and hydrogen drops. But in correlative studies done in Japan on centenarians in Okinawa, the centenarians actually have higher breath hydrogen than the average young person. So there's lots of these strong correlations on our body's ability to produce hydrogen. And unfortunately, due to poor lifestyle, poor diet, a lifetime of this, a lot of people, antibiotics, right? A lot of people have impaired their ability to make hydrogen endogenously, like within our own system naturally.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. That's right. And so again, like Alex said, those are correlational studies. However, if anything, it indicates that the correlation is going in the right direction. And also the hydrogen is very safe. It's natural to our bodies. It's not some, foreign synthetic molecule put into our bodies, okay? So going to the method of administration then, which one is the most effective? So we don't really know actually. They all have different benefits. Some studies will show that hydrogen produced from the bacteria, they certainly provide benefits. Drinking hydrogen water, in some cases, provides more benefits. There was an animal study in Parkinson's disease, and that was very clearly the case that the drinking of hydrogen water was much more effective than administration of lactulose, which is a non-digestible carbohydrate that produces a lot of hydrogen gas. But there's still benefits to many of these fibers that we see, okay? So maybe in this specific case, the drinking hydrogen water is more effective. Other cases, like inhalation, sometimes inhalation can be more effective. Other times, hydrogen water can be more effective. The other question then, if we talk about just the products in general, there's lots of ways to make hydrogen water. You can have hydrogen water that's come into ready to drink, right? On the shelves. You have to be very careful about some of those because hydrogen is a gas. It's the smallest gas.
It'll escape very easily.
It'll escape. So CO2 is a much larger molecule. There's oxygen, carbon, oxygen. That's CO2. It's a big molecule. You can store CO2 in these plastic bottles. That's carbonated soda, right? You can't do that with hydrogen gas. The hydrogen molecule, just two H's, will diffuse right through that plastic. So if you see hydrogen water that's in plastic containers in the store, it's a scam. It's not.
And even a lot of them in aluminum pouches will use a plastic cap, right? And then they'll have some of the same issues.
Right, okay, got it.
Yeah, the aluminum, you can store hydrogen in aluminum, but with the plastic cap, the pinholes, it'll go out eventually. And even the aluminum foil is not very thick. That's why it's a foil, right? So it's not very thick. So over time, it can still leak out. And the concentration generally in pouches is quite low. So when it comes to ready-to-drink products, you want to find it in a can. That's going to be, in general, that's going to be your best delivery. But just because it's in a can doesn't mean that it's also a sufficient concentration of hydrogen or that there's even any hydrogen in there. So you still have to be careful.
Okay.
Now there are these portable bottles. That's very common. You basically, it does electrolysis of water, which is the decomposition of water to hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. Oxygen gas goes out the bottom side. Hydrogen gas comes out the top. You can see, you can look at on the market. You can see videos of these bottles. This gas is being produced. That's hydrogen gas. And it's a great idea. It's a great concept. But those bubbles you're seeing are just being produced and they're coming right out. They're not dissolving in the water. That's going to be a problem because to get the benefits, you have to drink the water with hydrogen gas dissolved in the water. Mm-hmm. Often, not always, but often, the bottles are not dissolving the gas into the water very well. So the concentration, when you measure it with gas chromatography, the concentration of hydrogen gas in the water is extremely low, sometimes not even detectable. Other times, there's some byproducts in the water, including chlorine, ozone, oxygen, and so on, because they don't have the correct membrane and so on. So there are concerns in general about bottles. Some of them work great. I've tested some bottles, and they can produce a high concentration of hydrogen, but often even those ones, sometimes the consistency, they over time, they start to decrease, right? That doesn't mean that it's all bad. You just have to be cautious about what you're doing, which company you want to buy it from. Make sure that you can contact their support team if you wanted to go that route and so on. Go ahead.
I'll add a point on the bottles. It's actually kind of a catch-22. The ones that produce the highest hydrogen concentration initially are the ones that tend to break down the fastest. And this is because to dissolve the hydrogen in water, you need to pressurize. And to get up to, some of them are claiming 5 parts per million of hydrogen. Well, that will take roughly, 60 psi? Right, to pressurize that hydrogen in water, but the gaskets are often only rated for 30 or 40 psi.
Oh, right, okay.
Right? So the bottles will start leaking after several uses. Sometimes they last a few weeks or a month, but eventually they start dropping down below 1 parts per million, 0.6, 0.7 parts per million. So some of the best bottles on the first use end up being ones that break down the fastest.
Got it.
Although, even though they're breaking down the fastest, that just means they're now equivalent to the worst ones.
Yeah.
But, well, maybe they're still better. The worst ones will actually produce chlorine and potential heavy metals because the electrodes aren't pure, right? So bottles can have a place for it, but there are those concerns you have to take in consideration. Other products, those are the main hydrogen water products. And then, of course, there's the tablets. Right, and that's, of course, Alex. That's his whole invention. Maybe I'll just let you talk about the tablets a little bit, and then we've used them in clinical research. We can talk about some of that a little bit too. But
right, okay, and that's the form that I've been using for about 5 years now. I'd say maybe 5 or 6, actually a little bit longer, probably like 6 or 7 years, because I was one of those guys, as I mentioned before, that had the machine, the True-C machine, that obviously didn't kind of work out as well as I'd hoped. But that's when I kind of started looking into this a little bit more and discovered the tablets. And for me, because I travel about 6 months of the year, I just find it this the most efficacious way of doing it. Of course, if I'm at home, I'll have the soak as well. I'll throw it in a bath, much to my wife's dismay, because I never clean the bath after. But that's a form that I like to use. But why did you decide to come out with the tablets, Alex?
So on our first podcast, I think I told my backstory in full, so I'll just kind of abbreviate it. Basically, I was about 10 years ago, I was competing in CrossFit. I was really active in various martial arts, helping a lot of friends, training partners get ready for fights, whether kickboxing or MMA. And I was training probably 6 hours a day, right? I was in the best shape of my life. And I got really sick. I got a mystery virus. They couldn't figure it out, but I had sudden onset narcolepsy. My C-reactive proteins were 35 milligrams a deciliter, so about 100 times abnormal inflammation. I had central nervous system fatigue. Things were just not going well. And I basically, when the dust settled from that, I developed polyarthritis. So I had osteoarthritis in 11 joints overnight. I went on a high dose of naproxen, so a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, like 1,000 milligrams a day, 5 times what you take in a leave, and cortisone injections. About 9 months later, I fainted in the gym several times, right? I developed ulcers, right? Over this 9 months, I'd spent the time that I'd been training scouring PubMed, just looking for anything to regulate the inflammatory response, because my C-reactive proteins were still high. They were like 1.5, 2, which is like what you have when you have the flu or you're sick. I'd bought a hydrogen machine for about $5,000, right? And I was just on my merry way doing various biohacks and protocols. But when I had to stop the naproxen, all my joints froze again. So I realized that nothing what I was doing except for the drugs was actually keeping my inflammation down. I went back to PubMed. I was scouring research. I found more research on hydrogen, which kind of pissed me off because I had this $5,000 machine But I decided to buy the full studies and start reading the materials and methods to see how they were making hydrogen. And none of them were using a machine like what I'd bought. A lot of them were using magnesium. And I ended up finding a reagent to test the hydrogen in water called H2 Blue, and there was no detectable hydrogen coming out of my machine. I had to triple the input, so it was like 0.03 parts per million. I then went on a long road of sourcing magnesium, figuring out that it floats, pressing it into like a tablet, sealing it, and after I developed these first hand-pressed tablets, and I was drinking a couple liters a day, it was about 3 parts per million, all my joints unfroze. And I'm like, there's something here. I ended up partnering with a PhD chemist from the pharmaceutical industry. After he originally thought it was the worst pseudoscience he'd ever heard, he started reading the research and got really interested. Then it took us about a year, thousands of formulation changes and iterative adjustments, 15 failed scale-up attempts, but we came to market. And what's happened since then, we have thousands more iterative adjustments. One of the reasons why yourself and a lot of others turn to the hydrogen tablets, we get a consistent dose every time, and it's the highest of any technology on the planet. So in 500 milliliters of water, we're getting over 12 parts per million. And hydrogen does work in a dose-dependent response. So far in the literature, we've found many examples where you need a higher concentration and dose to see an effect, or a higher concentration and dose shows a greater effect, but in no instance has a higher concentration and dose shown a worse effect or side effects. So that's one reason why Dr. Lebaron and a lot of other research teams have turned to the tablets to run their clinical and preclinical research. So we now have 25 or so published clinical trials. To FTC and FDA standards, we have 21 approved structure function claims. We've basically shown it in phase 2 trials to reverse metabolic syndrome and fatty liver disease. We've shown, improvements in brain metabolism in a handful of studies. We've shown weight loss in a half dozen studies. We've shown significant effects on phenotypic biomarkers associated with the aging process. So the research has just been really expanding, and that's something I've been doing with the tablets, is supporting, professors like Dr. Lebaron and others all around the world in conducting this research, so we can learn more and learn when hydrogen works, when it's going to work the best, how should we administer it, for how long, and in some cases if it doesn't work.
Right, okay, got it. Now, one of the things I wanted to touch on as well, because my demographic, their ears will perk up when they hear about weight loss associated with taking in hydrogen and performance improvement in association with taking hydrogen. I know there's some more recent clinical studies that have just come out, I believe, based on performance and recovery. So could we touch on what we are finding there? Because a lot of my listeners here just think, okay, pre-workouts, that's what's going to get me going. That's what's going to help me. My post-workout protein is going to help with the recovery. But let's talk about how hydrogen helps in that case.
So I'll touch on weight loss first, and then we'll both talk about the exercise side, because Dr. Lebaron, his master's is actually in exercise and sports science, right? So he has a big background. He's a competitive athlete himself. So, but with the weight loss, we've seen in half a dozen trials now to show weight loss, but we're starting to see some of the mechanisms and how it might work now. So originally we thought it might be just more energy. We've seen in some of the trials, like the metabolic syndrome study, the journals were showing that people were more active, they were walking more in their daily diaries. We've seen in 2 trials on acute sleep deprivation that we've been equivalent or even outperformed caffeine at raising brain metabolism. So maybe people with bad sleeps have more energy when they're having hydrogen, they're more active, they burn more calories. But now we're seeing some more mechanistic effects on like appetite and how hydrogen works. So for instance, on a recently published study on an overweight but healthy population, they lost weight, but we found 2 really important things. One, hydrogen regulated ghrelin, which a lot of people call the hunger hormone, but it has other roles in glucose metabolism, insulin response, and neuroprotection. So what ends up happening with ghrelin in overweight people is they don't get the peaks and the valleys, right? Your ghrelin is supposed to be high when you're fasted, driving hunger, and that's supposed to drop after you eat.
Yeah.
In obese people, it just stays steady state. So you're a little bit hungry all the time. That's why you just keep eating and snacking. So hydrogen actually recovered that peak in fasting, right, in the overweight group. It also showed in a sub-analysis in the participants that it regulated the brain chemistry involved in satiety. Now, Tyler might get mad at me because this study isn't published yet. We're both authors on it, but I'll touch base on another really cool preclinical study we're working on that used the tablets. It was in a obese model driving high cholesterol in mice. So they're given a high-fat diet to obesity. And the hydrogen group alone, and it was either hydrogen, rosuvastatin, so one of the leading statins, or the combination of hydrogen and rosuvastatin. The hydrogen group alone, they resisted weight gain, and they weren't eating as many pellets. When the food was measured, the hydrogen group was eating less. But what's more is in the group with hydrogen and rosuvastatin, they were synergistic in regulating GLP-1, right? So GLP-1 is what's behind the craze with like Ozempic and Mounjaro, all these weight loss drugs. So again, and it's the reverse of ghrelin, but you want your GLP-1 to be low when you're fasted and elevate after eating, right? In overweight, obese people, it just kind of stays all the time. And in these drugs, it throws it into overdrive, so it's high all the time. Hydrogen restored that
baseline,
that valley, and likely the peak as well.
Yeah.
But I'll let Tyler talk a bit more about the weight loss.
Yeah. Yeah, it is an interesting thing. And I think one study that's important is an animal study, but it's powerful. And this study showed that it compared hydrogen water to caloric restriction. So fasting and all this stuff is a big craze. I think that's what you recommend to your people too, right?
Yeah, non-training days, I usually get them to fast because they're consuming so much food on their training days.
Right, trying to lower mTOR activity, I imagine, and things.
Improve AMP kinase and autophagy, take the stress away from their digestive system, etc.
So hydrogen is really important in these areas because it can act in somewhat as an exercise and or fasting mimetic. So it's going to activate some of those same pathways in the direction that is favorable. So when it comes to the weight loss, this animal study, there was a high-fat diet, and they were leptin resistant. So this is the animal model that was used, but the results are very impressive. One group drank hydrogen water, the other group did not. The group that drank hydrogen water did not get obese. You can look at in the study published in the Nature Publishing Group. The images are obvious. Which one drank hydrogen water, which one did not, and they also compared it to caloric restriction. The drinking hydrogen water in this specific study was equivalent to about a 20% caloric restriction. That's huge. And then there was a synergistic effect when you combine the two together. So when you did caloric restriction and drank hydrogen water, the effect was even greater.
Right.
Now, in the study, one of the mechanisms was that hydrogen water was able to activate or increase hepatic growth factor, FGF21, fibroblast growth factor 21, which is involved in the energy expenditure. And in turn, this can increase things like PGC1 alpha. So now you're talking about the AMPK signaling, mitochondrial biogenesis, some of these benefits you want to get from fasting at that mitochondrial level, right? And then it has some antagonism with mTOR, right? So that's not stimulated all the time and so on. So this also helps to explain some of the mechanisms for the weight loss. I think for athletes...
Can I chime in with the thought
Please.
first? Yeah. Talking about these miraculous benefits in mice is another point I want to bring up in why a super high concentration is needed in humans and is likely showing a better result. Because a lot of these rodent studies use a much lower concentration than the bottles or the tablets especially, but rodents drink about 12 times as much water per body weight as humans do. And they're getting all of their water from the hydrogen water, and they're drinking it in a little short window rather than all day long. So basically what ends up happening is the mice are often getting between 48 to 96 times more hydrogen than we're administering clinically, right, to humans. So the only way we can counteract that is by raising the concentration. so that so that humans are getting relatively closer the amount of hydrogen into our cells as the mice are getting.
That was Ben Greenfield that photobombed,
Yeah.
by the way.
Thanks, Ben. Oh, he's a great guy, good friend. Yeah, that's a good point. Just that does help to illustrate the importance of having the higher doses. That's what we think. I mean, there's still more research needed to be beyond this. Not everything shows dose-dependent effects, but there's a lot of trends that way, and there are some exceptions, but we can talk about those later. Okay, now with the athletes, we're actually just publishing another study right now. Actually, on the Russian one. That one's almost finished. I almost finished writing that one up. If you want, you could talk about that one.
Yeah, sure.
And then I'll talk about just some general things that I think are very important that people should know about hydrogen compared to other supplements for exercise.
Okay.
And if I get anything wrong on this Russian study, correct me, because I read it and sent my comments back like 6 months ago, and I noticed that you're still sending comments back, so you're a lot more recent on reading this. But it was a really cool study in Olympic level, like athletes, done in Russia. And it was 4 weeks. They were having a liter of hydrogen water from the tablets a day, so 2 tablets and 500 milliliters of water, double-blind, placebo-controlled for 4 weeks, and we found some really strong benefits. So they improved their peak torque measured by leg extension, but more significantly, they improved their peak torque after exhaustive exercise, which shows the anti-fatigue effects of hydrogen gas. We also showed improvements in body composition. So these are, again, world-class athletes, like Olympic-level athletes, that they lost fat and gained muscle in 28 days. But the really cool thing we saw, and we've seen this in other research, we saw that hydrogen completely blunted the rise in creatine kinase, which is a marker of muscle damage. So that's one of the other mechanisms that we're finding how hydrogen can help athletes.
Right, okay, got it.
Yeah, I just thought you should talk about it because you were very helpful with the study, with providing tablets and everything. So we appreciate it, and that's why, like, just about products in general, just kind of a digression real quick. We want to have, when we do clinical studies, it's important that we provide a consistent doses of hydrogen, and we do like the higher concentration. So we often choose tablets, but we've done other products or other ways of doing it, right? Before the industry grew, we were just making it in the lab. You know, it's easier now that we have commercially viable products, right? It was a pretty interesting study because these were highly trained athletes. We'll have to talk a little bit more about some refinements on that, but hopefully we'll publish it soon. Okay, what I really wanted to say though about the hydrogen gas when it comes to athletes is actually a warning about antioxidants and anti-inflammatories in general when it comes to exercise performance. Because it turns out that when we exercise, we're breathing more oxygen, we do produce more free radicals. And so we have more oxidation that's going on. And so we tend to want to combat that by taking conventional antioxidants. However, research shows, especially in animal studies, that conventional antioxidants actually blunt or impair exercise performance and exercise benefits. Not all studies, but a number of studies are really showing, especially high doses. And that's largely because these free radicals that are produced, they mediate the beneficial adaptations of exercise. You make a free radical, that free radical can harm you, so your body responds and gets better, stronger, and it activates things like mitochondrial biogenesis and a lot of other benefits, okay? Taking high doses of synthetic antioxidants can actually impair those adaptations. So a legitimate concern could be, well, if hydrogen gas has antioxidant effects, it's the smallest one, so it'll actually get there for sure. Maybe that will impair exercise performance, just like many other things. And it turns out that's categorically not the case, because hydrogen gas cannot neutralize any of the beneficial free radicals. it can only neutralize the harmful radicals, like the hydroxyl radical. And many studies have demonstrated that hydrogen gas has performance-enhancing effects. Some studies show not really any benefit. We published a couple of studies that we didn't really show specific benefits in, for example, a true increase in VO2 max, just an acute supplementation and not all of a sudden you have like a higher VO2 max. It's not really expected to, but we also show it doesn't happen, right? It's not a miracle cure or something. But many of these studies that even showing, quote unquote null effects also show there are no downsides. And that's not true with many of the conventional antioxidants. And that is the same story with anti-inflammatories. Anti-inflammatories that blunt inflammation, that can impair adaptations to exercise. We need inflammation. That's what signals our body to recover, to repair, to get stronger. And so hydrogen gas modulates the inflammatory response. And in turn, that's going to allow us to recover faster without blunting the benefits of the exercise training.
And actually, and I know you've really liked some of these studies, like the group out of Brazil, Nogueira, I believe, that has shown that rats in a forced swim test, with or without hydrogen, that the hydrogen actually potentiates the stress response of exercise. So the acute stress goes higher, but then they return to redox homeostasis faster. So it's as if they worked out harder and recovered quicker from the oxidative stress.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why I said earlier, you can often think of hydrogen as a mimetic of exercise because it activates some of those same pathways, right? And it's interesting, like mTOR, in a fasting state, it can help to suppress this. But following exercise or with that, you can see improved activations of different pathways. But it's all about getting your body back to homeostasis, back to recovery, so that you can exercise again. Because really, that's the goal. We get stronger and better when we're resting, not when we're exercising.
Yeah.
We are hurting ourselves when we exercise. We've got to recover fast. And hydrogen seems to help that. At least we know it does not impair.
I want to talk about the other recent study that's under peer review that I'm going to be presenting at Aspen in Milan in September with Professor Ostajic. So in another study in the exact opposite population of these Olympic athletes, it was an older population that had no exercise habituation. So they had no exercise protocol going in, very out of shape, entering old age. And they started practitioner oversawn exercise, a few times a week. And this is quite dangerous for older people who are really out of shape because exercise is a big stress. It can cause hazards. So again, it was double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized trial. And in the hydrogen group, we saw a lot of very interesting things. So for instance, the placebo group, they were approaching rhabdomyolysis. They were under extreme stress. Their creatine kinase had risen about 700%, right? And hydrogen completely blunted that, blunted that rise. Same thing with the myoglobin, had risen by about 900%, and hydrogen blunted the rise in the myoglobin. In addition, the hydrogen raised free testosterone and DHEA. It improved sleep outcomes, especially in the women. And I actually want to get into this because we've seen in multiple studies now that women have had stronger effects than men, right, in hydrogen. They've gotten more significance. Perhaps this is a relative dose issue, right? Because the average man is going to be much larger than the average woman.
Right.
So we've seen stronger results in women in a lot of these studies than in men. So we saw a stronger result in the sleep in the women in the group. But we also saw a regulation of the cortisol response, right? Now, cortisol is a stress hormone, and actually athletes show higher spikes in cortisol after exercise because they're better adapted to that stress. So the hydrogen basically showed to habituate the untrained older individuals to the stress of exercise much better than the placebo group.
Got it. And speaking of the dose then, you mentioned about obviously the dose could be a lot higher for that female relatively. Should, for instance, with the tablets here, we got 80 milligram per tablet.
Magnesium.
Magnesium.
So, yeah.
So for me, being at about 210 pounds, what would you believe would be the best dosage for me? And would it be in one go or twice a day or 3 or what?
So this is an area, and I'm sure Tyler will agree, that we need way more research. Right? We don't know well enough.
Got it.
So I can only go off of anecdotal evidence. I have found that I see experiential results scaling up to about 5 tablets a day.
Got it.
And what I like doing, because if hydrogen is working as this adaptive stress, we know with other adaptive stresses like exercise, if you do the exact same training every day forever, it stops being the same kind of stress. You get used to it, right? You stop getting the same benefits. So I'm big in favor of doing a washout every 3 to 6 months for about a week and changing your protocol. So at one point, I might take 4 or 5 tablets a day, first thing in the morning, a liter of water on an empty stomach. And then after a washout, I might do 2 in the morning and then 2 before I exercise, or 2 mid-afternoon, for a lull. We've seen similar things with a lot of the athletes we work with, or I work with, and some of the brands that I supply to. For instance, like UFC fighters, the heavyweights we've worked with start really seeing a difference when they're taking 4 or 5 tablets a day. But a lot of the lighter weight fighters, and especially the female fighters, notice a difference right from 1 tablet. So it seems quite variable. This is all anecdotal, but we've noticed some trends in the anecdotes, but we need to research this better.
Got it.
I don't know if you can add anything to that.
Well, yeah, I don't like anecdotes in terms of, but it is, we call it anecdotal evidence, so I guess it is a form of evidence, but we try to use this as researchers so we can see any trends, so we can know maybe how we can direct that research. But mechanistically, it's hard to really say. But if that's people's experience, we know it's safe. I think people should try to do. The only way you can overdo it on the tablets or anything is by, too much magnesium. That's like 10 tablets every day for a long period of time. Then maybe that's, or probably over 10. I think the UL is around 1,000 milligrams of magnesium, but most people are deficient in magnesium. Most people only get around 350 milligrams of magnesium a day. We need closer to 400 to 500 milligrams, optimally closer to 700 milligrams of magnesium. So taking a few extra tablets would actually provide you high levels of magnesium. And so there could be a small confound.
And a highly bioavailable source.
Yeah, and it is a high bioavailable source because by definition, when you make hydrogen gas from the magnesium, you are producing magnesium ions, which is readily bioavailable. So there could be a potential confound in these anecdotal examples where people are potentially benefiting from the magnesium as well. However, it has.
We all lose placebo.
However, there is also logic that the higher amounts could also be beneficial because, of course, in the clinical data, we do double-blinded placebo-controlled studies, and typically the studies where we're using 3 tablets a day as opposed to just 1, or different product where the concentration or dose is a lot lower, it's not as evident, those benefits. So we do kind of see those trends, and then some extrapolations with the animal studies, as Alex mentioned.
Okay, all right, great. Now, the one thing that I want to touch on before we sign off here is that I'd like to explore. Are there any studies that show that hydrogen has a positive impact on the health of certain organs, maybe kidney, liver, brain, or anything like that? Are there actually studies there showing certain benefits in certain conditions?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's one of the nice things about hydrogen, but also one of the difficult things to understand, is that hydrogen has been shown to be therapeutic in every organ of the human body. And that's almost makes like hydrogen sound like a panacea, where it's too good to be true, so you shouldn't believe it, right? And it also, but the reason for that is because hydrogen is working at the cellular level, the fundamental target of oxidative stress, inflammation, regulating things like autophagy, all these different pathways that every organ and cell of our body, technically not every cell, but every organ of our body uses. So it would make sense that it would benefit every organ, the kidney, the heart, the brain, the liver, the pancreas. And we can go into clinical studies and mechanistic studies explaining the reasons why. But generally it has to do with its ability to attenuate excessive amounts of oxidative stress, regulating the inflammatory response, promoting things like autophagy, or sometimes inhibiting autophagy, because you can have too much autophagy, autophagic cell death.
Yeah.
Right?
And there's been some really cool studies in hydrogen. So hydrogen usually upregulates autophagy, right? Activates autophagy. But in some cool studies like after heart failure and resuscitation after drowning, hydrogen has completely suppressed autophagy, right? Showing its regulatory role rather than it just drives one thing all the time. But I can touch on two to tie back into what you said earlier about how sometimes hydrogen water is more effective, sometimes hydrogen inhalation is more effective. In the pharmacokinetic studies that have been done on hydrogen, it shows that these different administration methods will saturate different organs in different amounts. So likely in the future, we're going to be able to determine that hydrogen water might be better for A, B, C, but hydrogen inhalation might be better for X, Y, and Z.
Got it.
And also in getting the proper dose and concentration, there's going to be wildly different levels that will be effective for different things. So for instance, you might only need 0.1 parts per million to start seeing some benefits in your skin when you're bathing in it, right? But then you might need a much higher concentration to get into your connective tissues and your muscles. Likewise with your internal organs, a low concentration might work absolutely well enough for gut health, right, and helping your intestines, but you might need a much higher concentration, and this has actually been trending in the research, for something like your liver, right? For instance, what is it, something like when we're seeing the dose-dependent responses in like fatty liver, it's something like 10 times higher when we convert from mouse to human as when we see the benefits for exercise performance.
Yeah, it is a little complicated. Typically in pharmacology, there is this drug issue where in animal studies we can give like 12 times the amount.
Metabolism, and
they have higher metabolism. They also have more receptors that can take up the drug, and there's a reason we do this. But hydrogen gas is a little bit different because it doesn't operate like typical pharmaceuticals, where it's like one drug, one target, one organ. Hydrogen has pleiotropic effects on the cells, modulating many different areas in very small ways that together make a significant difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate this talk, gentlemen. I know that you're both busy, especially you here. So Tyler and Alex, should anybody want to reach out to you and have any specific questions about hydrogen? And by the way, we will link our previous interview with Alex in the show notes. Where can people find you both? Yeah,
so for me, well, first I'll say if you have questions about products or things, please talk to Alex or Kris, whatever. I teach at the university, chemistry and exercise physiology, and I do a lot with the Molecular Hydrogen Institute. We're a science-based nonprofit. We're focused on the research and education of hydrogen as a medical gas. We do a lot of academic research and things. So you can go to molecularhydrogeninstitute.org. We also just made a social media, H2MHI, that you can find on Instagram. Follow me. I do post quite a bit of stuff on my research, and I'm trying to be more active on there. So just Tyler W. Lebaron. That's my handle on there. And I post a lot of stuff on hydrogen, and I'm posting some other stuff here and there just on exercise and health and fitness things in general. But check out our institute. We even have a certification course. So if you're really geeking out about this stuff, we have education where you can learn about molecular hydrogen, some basic principles of science and chemistry and biology, and it's going to help you in all aspects of your life. And this is one of the things we're doing to help fund our research so we can continue doing more things.
That's awesome.
Thank you, Kris.
No, of course. Thank you. I appreciate it. And Alex?
So you can find me at alextarnava.com. That'll have a link to some of the blogs I've written, most of the podcasts I've done, and some information on some new projects that are being developed, like the first safe and effective hydrogen inhalation machine I'm coming to market with later this year that I have pending patents on. That's been about 7 years in development, so That's a new one. And also some of the really cool research we're doing preclinically on delivering approved pharmaceuticals in the tablet and seeing synergy. So we're potentiating the results of these pharmaceuticals and lowering side effects. So that will all be on my website. For my social media, it's Alex Tarnava. I am not that active, and to be honest, I'm not much of an influencer, so you might get the odd post of my food or me at UFC fights or something like that, or at a concert. But I do try and post screenshots of the studies I'm an author on. I'm just really bad at formatting from my telephone to Instagram.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. But gentlemen, thank you ever so much for joining me. And as I mentioned, you'll find everything in the show notes, including their contact details. And if you do have any questions, please let us know. But please like, share, and we will see you next time. Peace.